All right. So welcome, everybody. My name is Armando Castellano, and this is Quinteto Latino's webinar series called California Adelante. And if you don't know, Adelante is kind of in Spanish means moving forward. And that's what we're doing with these composers, bringing their voices forward into the field and to share with you. It's a three-part series where we're going to explore the lives and the careers and the music of three California-based composers. And as many of you know, Quinteto Latino is an advocacy organization with a professional wind quintet. We advocate on behalf of classical music, Latinos in classical music, and building awareness around issues that impact Latinos in classical music. And my name is Armando Castellano. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the founder and director and the French horn player of Quinteto Latino. I'm sitting in my office here in Menlo Park, California. I have my French horn behind me. I also have some music back there that I'm working on. This is where I do my Zooms, where I do my work now, and where also I practice my music. Like so many Quinteto Latino events, we really hope that this can be a conversation between Quinteto Latino, between Gabriela, and all of our community participants, all of you here. We really want it to be a conversation. So please, and to kick off that conversation, we want to ask you to share in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind, please, if you have access to your keyboard there, sharing in the chat, your name, any affiliations or orgs you want to share about that you belong to. If you want to share your instrument, if you're a musician or a composer or some part of the field, please go ahead and share that. Whatever is your connection to this conversation, that's what we want to hear. So please go ahead and put that in the chat. And please, everybody here, look who's here. And be connected in the chat too. I just want to, say hi to each other. I know some of you may have known each other or heard of each other. Please connect here. I love it when Quinteto Latino can be a community builder and a bridge builder. So we are thank you for doing that, and just welcome to everybody. We're kicking off this series, this three-part webinar with the amazing Gabriela Lena Frank, who's here with us today. Hi, Gabby. And I just am so pleased. I've known Gabby for years, and just as a composer in the field, working all over internationally. And we are so blessed to have a piece from of Gabby that she wrote us in the last year that we just finished recording about a month ago. And we will be playing one of the movements here today. So I just want you to, Gabby, please say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I go by Gabby, as you know, or Gabriela, and I'm based in Berkeley, and I use she, her pronouns, and really happy to be with you. I should actually say that primarily I'm based now in this tiny town of Boonville, California, that I had never heard of until about 5 years ago, when my husband started looking around for where we could purchase a home. And this is about 2 hours north of my home city of Berkeley in Mendocino County. I am a composer by trade. I did my training at Rice and then University of Michigan for my doctorate. And my primary teachers that really influenced me were first my father. He was a longtime Mark Twain scholar at UC Berkeley. So he used to assign extra homework to me and my older brother. And at the time it was super annoying, but now I'm very grateful for it, because it really taught us about articulating our views and honoring the idea of Mark Twain, who, as you know, is our first great American writer. But what really profoundly affected me about him was that he was the first great American writer to use English as spoken by Americans. He didn't try and sound British, and he could look at ordinary events, people's lives, and tie them to really profound subjects. And this is the kind of attitude that I bring in exploring my mom's homeland culture as a composer. That for me is really miraculous when I travel in Peru, the things that are ordinary to my cousins that are there, and to really marvel that I get to inherit this culture, that this is really in my lineage. I'm not making it up, it really is in my lineage. and it comes out as a gift always in my music. And I think Mark Twain was really observant of what was around him in that way. I have a routine that includes also now administering my academy that I founded about 4 years ago. And I felt like, my goodness, this country, the national discourse has just gotten so awful. It was really dispiriting and unbelievable with each level, each descending level. You remember how we felt during the election in 2016, with exactly when I started thinking, one of the few women of color with a career of major substance, I got to do something now, even more than just write another piece of music. So I think this is really common among artists of color, that we include now activism, but also leadership and starting new enterprises. And I remember thinking, is this really audacious? I'm going to put my name, Gabriela, I'm going to put my name on this institution. And my first donor, who was the only one that would give me a little bit of money, but the only one when it was just an idea. I didn't even have anything to show yet. It was just an idea. She had that trust. And she asked me, so what are you going to name it? And I was thinking things like, I don't know, Armando, things like Creative Laboratory or Mendocino Music Workshop, or some of these kind of generic things that you come up with. And she was shaking her head and she said, look, you sign your name on all your pieces. You've been signing your name on everything. Why don't you? Women don't put their name on things. Put your name on this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad she did. So that's how I think of my work now, not just as a composer, but like Armando, an activist. We have an institution that we also work through, and they're all part of the same holistic package. So I'm very delighted to be with you.
Thanks, and I love that story about your name. I'm so glad you put your name on it, and I hope that it inspires other Latinos too, who that their name and their branding and them as people is so important and actually really marketable in the field. And it's important to have our names on the, I remember, I just see so often when I'm with students and when I talk about is students who see their face and their skin color and names that sound like them and language and accents that sound like them on the stage, how it's important for them. Not only, I don't even make other horn players. I just want them to have a good self-esteem and to feel good about themselves and their identity. And I think that's a great example of doing that. I'm so glad that you made that decision. I was thinking about this project that we had in the last year was a long time, number of years in coming and getting it done. And we had started talking about it years ago, and we finally completed it. And the germ of the idea and thinking about where we met, and I remember talking about these same issues years ago, 6 and 7 years ago, when we were first talking. And just thinking about how much has changed or not, and our experiences in the last years. I know for me in the last year, it's been a lot of growth around being able to be much more open about racism in classical music and around words like white supremacy and white systems, that we can say that. I can say that more openly, and we as an organization have come much more out and put that in the front. And I wondered, since in the last 6 or 7 years and to now, how that feels for you. You've already just touched a little bit of that. I just wanted to just say that since we've known each other, how it's felt for you in the last year or so, in the last years.
Oh my goodness. Well, I never thought this was going to happen in my lifetime, that we would really be addressing the racismo, invisible, not so invisible. I thought that we Latinos were always going to be en route, that we were part of the historical spectrum to get the next generation onto the programs, onto the main stage. I really didn't think that was going to start happening. And I saw myself as an outlier. When I got signed up by a major agent back in 2003, I was like a shot out of the dark, changed my life. But then after me for 15, 16 years, they didn't sign on another person of color. And this is a wonderful organization, that really made things possible for me. So this last year, I think I felt, first of all, some grief. Absolutely. Just like with everybody else, there's that grief.
Oh yeah, a lot of pain, a lot of sadness.
Then, sure. I felt it, and then I felt grief because I started revisiting all my experiences. For the first time, I really started talking about my first day in the conservatory at Rice, where I was just incredulous. I was at this beautiful school. We were the freshman class to use this really wealthy school. And so the first ones to use this new building that they had just created with Homestead Act of money and oil money that's really common around Houston. And after a few minutes practicing some Ravel, one of the members of the piano faculty burst into my practice room, and he started yelling at me, and he was saying, you know, what are you doing? And you need to leave, and you got to step back away from the instrument. And I realized he thought I was one of the Mexican maids, because all of the cleaning staff at the school were all Central American women and short like me, and I looked like one of the Mexican maids daring to touch this piano. And I remember there's something a little bit defiant. I was 17 years old. I was a kid. What did I know? And I grew up in Berkeley, right? So what did I know about this kind of treatment?
Yeah.
And in an educated household, middle-class household. And this little voice said, and what if I were? Wouldn't that be amazing that somehow I was a Mexican maid and I'm playing virtuoso Ravel? And so for me, activism began in that moment in a practice room, but also set the tone for who was included, who was expected to be included. And when he apologized and I explained I was in so-and-so studio and I put on my educated voice. I mean, it was like all these things. Now that I'm almost 50 years old, I was grieving last year to look back and say, God, look at everything I did to dance a little bit or to get what I needed. I had to put so much energy into strategizing the way that my wonderful roommates that treated me well, but they didn't have to do that. And it took years. It took years for me to go back and look at everything like that. And then to realize, my God, I landed fine. What were the ingredients in place? The lucky breaks that I had, and what is it going to amount to? I can write another piece for Quinteto Latino, another symphony for a major orchestra, but is that all that I can do? Mm-hmm. And so it kept going back to what I do with my Academy for emerging composers from different heritages. And I think a lot of us are asking this question of all diversities and examining, gosh, Armando, we're a complicated mix now of advantage and disadvantage both. And it's important for us to never stop re-examining that and say, what else can I do? I feel that this next generation of composers, they're supposed to go farther than me. They're supposed to write more music, write better music, expect even more than we expected. Sometimes we were just happy to be at the table, but they should expect like a certain measure of treatment and opportunity. And they shouldn't have to work as hard in a certain respect. I mean, I come from that Gen X generation where we felt like we had to work 3-4 times harder to get the same measure of respect. And I want my composers just to work hard, but not to feel like they're always coming from a place of deficit. So that's a placement of history, you know, where you are on the spectrum. So last year, I was already kind of thinking it. Last year, it came to a head when I could just look at the violence happening in the streets and the climate crisis, the fires we've been experiencing here and that are affecting Latinos more than any other, the COVID affecting Latinos more than any other constituency in our state. So people like you and me, we're supposed to do more, you know, hold these kinds of conversations and maybe say things that our emerging siblings aren't quite positioned to say. They're more vulnerable than we are.
It's an
incredible year.
It's a part of wielding power and sharing the power. A couple of things I want to point out that you said that I also had my janitor moment, you know, and I wonder how many musicians of color on this call also had their janitor moments or moments in the past where they were mistaken for, as a person of color in our field and one of the few in the room, for someone else who maybe didn't belong in that room, whether it be from another colleague or staff person. And I definitely have been told that I'm not supposed to be there, I'm doing the wrong thing, or to set up the chairs. That's something I was told. And I also just want to acknowledge like the trauma of that it is a trauma that takes healing and it takes time, and you carry it with you. And it's also can be a fire, but it is a trauma that can hold all of us back within these systems. And I see that a lot in a lot of the in myself and in some of the rooms when we're together as BIPOC communities. I love this concept of power and privilege, and I really hope to share whatever privileges and power I have. And there's a lot of ways that we do that by saying things that people in the movement are saying, like espousing that as an organization, putting it next to pieces that we perform, talking about these issues, about white supremacy, about racism, about diversity in classical music in a formal concert. Like we put it right next to the fine art music, because it has an impact, and it's part of, again, bringing voice to these communities and sharing the powers that we have. I think is really important. I want to move into, first of all, please put in any questions or comments you have in the chat so we can take some questions at any moment. And I just appreciate, again, everyone who's here, or if you want to say, amen to, or do you agree to anything that's being said, please feel free to do that. Also, I want to tell you, please connect with each other. I tell my mentees and folks, like, when you're on a chat like this, you should be Googling and LinkedIn all the other people here so you can get some names and build your network. I love, again, Quinteto being a network builder, a bridge builder, and I love seeing everybody's faces here. We're going to, I want to play a short video, like I said, that we recently recorded. It's a 4-movement work that Gabriela wrote for Quinteto Latino, and called Mitos. And the concept behind the project is that it's based on a number of myths from Latin America, and one, I think 3 of them are myths, and one of them is an object. And it manifested. We originally intended it for it to be a live theater event, partnering with a theater company. And after many years of planning, we suddenly went into COVID right when we were going to do the project. So we pivoted, and it's turned into a series of actually incredibly wonderful projects. We've already done a number of them. We're going to do more next year with students in school, cross discipline with visual art and theater and music. It's been such a wonderful project, and it's still developing and changing. And I just have appreciated what we've been doing with it. So that was the germ of the project and what it's turned into. And I know if you wanted to talk anything, Gabby, about the piece, about its inception, or your process for writing it at all before we play. We're just going to play one movement that's 3.5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think growing up in Berkeley, my household was bilingual up to a certain point, and then my mother, who's Peruvian, she got comfortable with English, and so when she would talk about Peru, it was like a magical landscape for me. I always had to go into my imagination. When I heard Spanish, it was like the magic language. And I loved hearing it. It was very musical to me. And the way she described where she grew up, Chimbote, a small fishing village in the north, and being too poor to really know about the mountains, but then hearing Cantonese as well as Quechua in her household, because my mother's Chinese Peruvian. She's a mix of indigenous blood, Chinese blood, and some Castilian and Portuguese blood. So what really fascinated me was that she liked Peruvian fairy tales, and she could actually tell me a lot of them. And so over the years, along with Mark Twain on one side and my mother's knowledge of Peruvian Andean mythology on the other side, and me and my brother being dreamers and bookworms, I always went into my head when I went to the piano to improvise. I got into composing through improvising, and I would put up my brother's X-Men comics and improvise to them. So everything was magic, super ability, superhuman. And there wasn't boundaries between the white heroes of the mutants and the pre-Columbian deities. So everything was very natural and fluid. And I think you have to hang on to that when you go through the conservatory. The conservatory offers you many, many things. It's a very deep training, but narrow. And so you have to really work to hang on to the parts of you that are not celebrated necessarily in the conservatory. I look at that as a relationship where I love European music very much, but that culture may not love my my culture, my music in a commensurate equal relationship. So I keep going back to mythology, whether it's a woodwind quintet, all my string quartets are that way, my symphonies are that way, La Llorona, the crying woman, not the one that we know, but like Peruvian style, which is different. Or you have like Iyapa, which is our version of Thor. And when I started traveling in Peru for the first time in my mid-20s, it was a very strange land where I had the culture shock, but I never lost that sense of magic. And my cousins would laugh because they would see me just go quiet and say, ah, la compositora, you know, she's working. And then they would start tiptoeing around me. I mean, we're all like pranksters and jokesters in this family, but they were proud that the exotic wing of the Peruvian family that went north is like obsessed with the culture. And so they still send me MP3s or cartoons that they see because they know it goes into my composing binder. So this piece is like that, with the element that in some ways it's a little less dense, it's a little less busy, a little more dreamy, because I was imagining perhaps actors being visible. It needs to share the stage. While it can be a concert work, and sharing a stage can be in an oral way, it can be visual. I've learned not to try and be a theater director or wordsmith, but just to say, let's just step back a little bit, because an imaginative partner will be able to find that space and surprise the musicians. We think of fitting our parts together, count, everybody comes in on 3, but just try to give it a little room. So what you're going to hear in this first movement, Kyle will lead off with this beautiful ascending line that descends. Everybody comes in a bit of a supporting role, and it doesn't interfere too much. It's kind of dreamy. The rhythms don't quite always line up. That ascending line is recognizable. Comes back, what, Armando 3-4 times, and then goes to a different place. You'll hear the flute will come in with a brilliant lick and going even higher. So I can imagine the director hearing that saying, okay, now the lights come in here, now actors come in here. And you have to think almost like it's a ballet. Just try to give them moments like that. And I love the internal theater. If all the players are treated equally, and there's like a place for each player to step in, I can imagine them leading a group. There's that inner theater that happens within chamber music that I frequently miss in symphony music, but I love thinking about the roles. So when I was composing this, I was like, now Armando gets his moment. Okay, and now we have Kyle coming back and taking it back. And I was really thinking about the experience of delivering this to the audience, as well as the inspiration. And so Tunda, one of the early conversations that you and I had, Armando, about this, we were saying, okay, we can't just go to Mexico and we can't just go to Peru. Let's try to go to Chile. Let's try to go to Colombia. It's hard because we're fascinated, right? We're fascinated with our culture. We put our vocation and our life into it. So this one comes more from, it's a little murky, but from Colombia, Ecuador, I think about. They think this is a shapeshifter that's often female, that does the typical luring the traveler into the forest to do nefarious things like take their soul or dry them up or, turn into them. There's all kinds of versions of this. So it should just feel a little bit like mystery and feel like you're about to take a trip. It may not be hospitable, it may not be friendly. It should have this sort of lyrical, almost a slightly seductive kind of measure to it.
Well, great. Thank you for, we really enjoyed playing it. And first I want to acknowledge a couple of things. Thank you for making it. We have 2 Quinteto Latino musicians here because they're going to be playing this, Leslie and Diane. You guys just wave Diane on the flute. We have been together 17 years. These folks, we have been sitting next to each other for 17 years. And I just love, it's amazing to play with another human being like that for so long. And it's incredible. I just really appreciate them so much, their partnership and their commitment to what Quinteto Latino does. So we're like Gabby said, we're gonna hear the first movement called Tunda. The musicians Diane Gruby on the flute, Kyle Bruckman on oboe, and Leslie Tagorda on the clarinet, and Sean Jones is on the bassoon. And I know Kyle's mom is here, although Kyle's not here. So just a shout out to her. And I know she's been waiting to hear this piece as well. We also have one of the funders for the piece here, which is Francis is here too. The Creative Work Fund is a program of the Walter and Elise Haas Fund and supported by a generous grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. This project was also funded by the Clarence E. Heller Foundation, in addition to Sam Mazza Foundation. And we recorded it in right as COVID was opening, in the one space that would let us take off our masks and record together. They've turned into an amazing partner for us, which is the First Presbyterian Church of Oakland. We're now an official community partner. They allowed us to record it. It's a beautiful church, and we look forward to continue partnering with them. It was a wonderful thing. I appreciate. So it really takes a village to put on a project like this. Really, it's really a collaboration from so many folks and many people here too. So let's go ahead and play. Adriana, if you could turn the on, and please keep chatting. While if you hear something fun, please go throw something in the chat. If you have questions, we'll do them after the piece. All right. Thank you. Yay.
Kind of moody music.
Would you say moody or movie?
moving and moody.
I think it's really evocative and compelling, and I love the arc of it and the ease of it as I'm listening and as we're playing it. It was just it was a lot of fun, and there's something also about sharing and playing music with your friends and people that you know well. I love being in a relationship with all the partners and building community together. But just it's fun to play pieces with people you know well and know have the same values and care about the same things. It's really nice. Okay, so as I mentioned, Quinteto Latino is an advocacy organization, and we advocate on behalf of Latinos in classical music. Well, so it's about Latino audiences, Latino musicians, also though Latino staff members or Latino board members, Latino funders, and of course, Latino composers. So that's what this is about. But I want to build awareness around, we are in all the different parts of arts organizations. We're not just musicians and we're not just composers, all of it, including funders. So I just want to dig into some of these topics around Latino issues in classical music generally. And, you know, but you've kind of answered this, but I just want to acknowledge why visibility around Latino arts in classical music, and particularly in contemporary music, is so critical at this time. So anybody, please ask a question. We're going to do some questions to Gabby. I'm going to ask some now, but if you have one about any topic that we've crossed or something new, please put it in the chat so we can keep track and offer that to Gabby. So just this question, Gabby, about visibility in the arts and why it's so critical now more than ever. It always was, but why now?
Gosh, I don't know how to answer that because it always was. That's kind of what I say.
Okay, so then why did the field change? Like what happened and what do we need to do now then? Okay, so the field's ready, we're ready. What do we do now? We're listening, all of us here. So, I mean, there's so many Latino artists here on this call. What should we do? What should be our charge? How's that?
Well, I think the first is that we're in a field where, from a presenter standpoint, it takes about 2 minutes for them to decide which Beethoven symphony they're going to play. And to understand that that's, first of all, what they're used to expending. And so they want to spend about 2 minutes of time to find a woman composer, a Black composer, or a Latino composer. And because the representation hasn't been there, when they go to a publisher and say, I want a Mexican composer, they're not going to have that. So the first thing we need to think about is how to bring attention and to encourage. Sometimes when I talk with my younger composers that are Latino, they have already eliminated major festivals. They have already eliminated talking to publishers and in terms of getting their music out there. They have almost resigned themselves to a counterculture existence for those in the know. And if you have connections to a major organization, you can bend the ear of a publisher, an agent, a conductor. I mean, we really need to re-examine who we know and who we can influence the charisma of our friendship and our personality. And to do it with charm, to do it with hospitality, it's like, come to my house, I'm going to cook you this amazing meal. And so we have to then make that an appointment with ourselves, not just like a mindset, as we actually put time into it 3 or 4 times a week. It's something that I really started doing when I started my academy. And I realized that just by being Latina, I could not instantly command into existence a diverse cohort of composers. They weren't going to flock. So in that first year that we existed, I went and I called every single composer that I remember really liking that I had met in the last 3 or 4 years. So I handpicked them all. There was no application process, just to get things going with the right cohort, the right vibe, really talented people. And it wasn't as diverse as I would have liked. So the second year, we did our first call for scores, and it was mostly white guys. And many of them were very talented. But I was like, no, come on, but I need to spell it out. We want diversity. And I fell into the habit that I was criticizing all these presenters and conductors for doing. You can't just put up a banner. So now me and my tiny staff, which is very diverse, we make it a real app. that we're constantly sending emails, we're constantly recruiting. We see who's coming up, who's the freshman that just enrolled that had written a really interesting solo violin work on, yes, okay, the Wapango again, but still, it's signaling something where they're going to come in. And we have these files that we keep. It takes a lot of effort. And we have to break down that, I think the protocols that a lot of the major presenters, conservatories have for attracting talent are not going to be the kind of nets you need to put out to get diverse talent. It's recruitment. And so we put money into it. There have been composers, for instance, that I felt weren't quite ready, need a little more experience, but we got them here as auditors just to show them the environment, and we treated them the same as everybody else. They could ask questions. We really made a point to cultivate the recruitment so that we could get them ready. And that's not a normal act. It's not a line item for most presenters. It's from funding and from money. It's not a way of thinking of ourselves as teachers or pedagogues or mentors. So we need to change the culture of how we interact with one another too. I think it begins with us. I think a lot of us that come through the conservatory have inherited that culture and just want to pour warm bodies, but it's actually how we build the population that also has to change. And it's what I model to myself. So that's the first thing I would say. The second, I had to learn to see talent in a whole new way. People that didn't have a great looking score, that didn't know to put the dynamics below the staff for instrumentalists, but above the staff for vocalists. They just didn't know all of these things. I might have eliminated before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I had to kind of take a risk. And sometimes these were improvisers, sometimes these were people that didn't read or write music very well. I had to like talk with them and say, if we got you a tutor and I work with you personally, would you be willing to learn these kinds of skills and learn a little bit more of this other culture so that you can bring yours into it and make us healthier? I mean, I had to learn to see talent in a different way. And I'm still learning about that. So if somebody doesn't conform exactly to 4/4, maybe it's because they didn't realize that they had a couple 5/8s in there going on. And they just needed to be told.
Yeah.
They would get it, but they just needed to be told.
Yeah.
If they couldn't play quite exactly in tune, maybe they were on a slightly different tuning system. And all they needed was just to spend a couple of weeks to clean up their fingering and they're going to get it. So you have to X-ray into a young person's talent, or maybe not a young person. That's the other thing, was that I realized that I was inheriting some of the ageist sorts of views too. And we have a lot of people of color that, because the attrition rate was so high in the conservatories, that dropped out. And I met one African-American woman who's 46 now. She's a huge talent. She was getting her doctorate at the same time as I was in Indiana University. I met her at a tiny little reading session and I said, wow, this is really beautiful. It's a very, it's a short piece and you sound like a mom that doesn't have a lot of time. And I'm just wondering. And so I started talking with her and I invited her in this past year to do some of her virtual workshops. She was hitting a home run each and every time. She was part of the effort in Atlanta. We know how important that was for the election. And she has 2 daughters and she was trying to believe again that she could pick up composing, even though she has a doctorate from a major university. And I do not think she's alone. And we're bringing her here. So we have to look at all the non-traditional candidates for our attention and re-examine the criteria. I think that has maybe worked for us in a number of environments, but all that criteria and we've got in here. So if we want to fast track it a little bit, we have to re-examine all of our assumptions that we actually thought might have been ethical even. And I think the last thing is, as we're doing this, I think there's a difference between being bitter and fierce. I like to think I'm fierce, but that I'm not bitter, that this is like the best mission, is a joyous mission. It's like availing myself of so much talent. I mean, we have so much to offer the Latino community. And there've been so many barriers. Sometimes we even accept those barriers. We don't realize it. We accept those barriers. So if we can dismantle them, but try not to get bitter, Once you get bitter, you stop seeing clearly, you're gonna miss opportunities. It doesn't mean that you're soft or you're passive. No, you can be fierce in this way. I also think bitterness means the bad people won. They won. You know, I mean, imagine, I tell my composers, I like your activism. Of course I do. It's why you're here. But I sometimes want you to go to that space that I used to go to. My mom told me those stories about Peru, which is a thriving Peru, a thriving land. We don't know what that looks like. But you're trained, you have a doctorate in imagination. Yes, you pour it into a French horn, you pour it into composing, but you have a doctorate in imagination, and to imagine what a thriving community looks like and write music for that as well. Music's supposed to be aspirational. So all these things, I think we need to remind ourselves that yes, we are in the moment, but let's re-examine how we used to identify talent, how we recruit, and what kind of message we're telling, and what tone, what spirit. It should be a joyous one,
Yeah.
like happy warriors, joyous warriors.
Love that. You know, the way I talk about Quinteto Latino is around love, like our core values, you know, and around equity and love at the same time. You know, some of the things that come to mind that I talk about. One is and this is just open questions, and I live in both. Do we build our own system, or do we work within the ones that are there? And I kind of go back and forth between each. You know, here I get fueled when I build my own system and with my own people, and this one is more transactional and extractive. So I really need both to like refuel myself and our community, and support each other. When I think about like quality is something I've been talking a lot about this last year, and about actually when you're talking about looking at scores and how composers, how good they are or not, and that goes back to my, what is quality and how do we define quality? And I have to decolonize my own training and my own, what I was told is quality and is good, and have an own opinion for myself and redefine it for myself, where I'm in power and for the field at large, so that I can actually I call it decolonizing my own aesthetic and my own voice and my own opinion. And then I can share that decolonized aesthetic and opinion with the field at large, and with, you know, in my teaching. And I love that idea of not bitterness, I said, with love. And I talk about it also around it with self-care, that we have to take care of ourselves so we can be those warriors and in the field and create the change. We have some really nice questions coming up. Do you mind if we go to some of the questions? And I didn't welcome Itayetsi, who's here, Uranga, who's a colleague of mine from New York City, who also plays the horn. Could you ask your question, Itayetsi? Please.
Hi guys, just give me a moment to find it because it's up. All right, okay. So hi Gabby, I really like that piece that you wrote. So my question is, what message do you share with young composers, especially Latinos?
Oh, I tell them how needed they are. They are so needed.
Wow.
And that, oh my goodness, I'm just giving myself goosebumps, because I just try to say with my tone how much they're needed by this world.
Yeah.
And that in that spirit, the world needs the best version of them. They need to train, they need to go out and be inquisitive, they need to feed themselves a mental and emotional diet of experiences, and they need to find their second, third, fourth family so they don't feel isolated and feel a little crazy. I remember I used to feel a little bit crazy because there was just no other people of color that, is this really right? Am I really gonna love 12-tone row music? I'm gonna stop loving my mom's Peruvian music. I'm gonna write serial stuff. And I mean, parallel fifths are really that offensive and bad, because panpipe music in Peru is all parallel fifths and stacked fourths and, you know. So I didn't realize how needed I was, and I started to realize it over the years, when I got more confident and I got more mastery, and I feel like I'm really needed now, but the best version of myself. So that's the message.
Love that.
The basic message. Yeah.
So powerful. When you know, Itayetsi, lives in Queens, and when I go to New York, I visit her, and her sister are both horn players in high school. And I talk about, I tell them I have to come all the way to New York to find two other Chicano horn players and two other Mexican American horn players. So I just love and appreciate. Thanks for coming, Italiazzi. Leslie, our wonderful clarinet player, Leslie. Do you mind asking your question too? And good to see you.
Yeah. Hi, Gabby. Thank you so much for your piece. So excited
Hi,
to
Leslie.
chat with you. So I have a question about identity. So, you know, as a mixed race woman, I am, you are. And so how did you kind of like choose how to identify yourself, right? Because like everybody's always trying to put you in the box. So everybody knows Gabriela as the Peruvian American composer, yet you're Chinese, you're Jewish, you're all of those. So how did you decide, and what was that journey like? Or do you go back and forth, grapple with that?
Well, if I seem to go back and forth, it's sometimes I'm adjusting for the occasion.
Code switching?
Yeah. You know what? There's like I've done code switching, but there's also maybe the audience are just, they could drink you in. They just need to hear a certain perspective and message. And I remember doing this one talk. Everybody's mixed race, but every which way, Vietnamese, French, and Black Japanese. And it was just that shared mestizo-ness and like how people couldn't identify you. And then there's this one part I said, okay, name all the ethnicities you've been mistaken for. And I won, because I could say Hawaiian. I have it in writing, like the reviewer said, my dad is Ashkenazi Jew and my mom's Japanese Peruvian, or somebody said I was Persian. I mean, I've been mistaken for everything. So I think sometimes it was by how I was looked at, especially when I was younger. So when I grew up in Berkeley, there were a few little signs like that. When, for instance, somebody would see me in an elementary school and they would put me in the row that needed extra help, just making an assumption. So it's kind of like how you treat the people, the kids of color. There were things like that that would just sort of happen. I realized, oh, I'm not white. And then, you know, it was just all these behaviors I talked about, being mistaken for the Mexican help. And so I said, okay, now I'm Mexicano, or I'm Central American. It was almost like the world pushing at me, saying, you know, this is who you are, this is where you should go. And my saying no. And so I think it's important for me to point out that I'm mixed race. And in my view, if not the majority, many Latinos are actually mixed race because we claim indigenous blood. And we may not know exactly what that blood is, but there's a common shared experience. And once you say you're mixed race, you're already starting to recalibrate the other person's perception. They can't comfortably go back into their tourist vision of Latinidad. And I think it's important for me to keep saying that. And I will also say that I'm Peruvian American, which is very different from the experience of my mom. So she's La Peruana, and I'm the daughter of the diaspora, the daughter of an immigrant. And to me, that's very American. And once I say I'm mixed race, and I was born here in English, my first language, and I'm Peruvian American, it really pivots me well to say, and I'm a patriot. And this is what a patriot looks like. I expect more from my country because I know it can do more. And we should be flying that flag, you know, and we should be, you know, saying words like patriotism. They shouldn't be words that we stay away from because of what sometimes it's hard for us to claim that. So it's very, very important for me to point out I'm mixed race. And, you know, I just talked about Mark Twain also, you know, being a big influence on me. And I've never had the privilege of working with a composition teacher that was not a white man. Some of them were not good. Others were incredible and life-changing and encouraged me. So that's a mixed race kind of view, I think. I don't know if that answered your question. You and I need to go get cafecito and talk about this. I think you could teach me.
You said when I introduced you, when we were meeting and talking about the questions, like this should be like a class, a course, you know, exactly. It's so rich with so many different directions. Jesus Plasencia, do you mind asking your question? Jesus, everybody, he's going to be our next guest on this 3-part webinar. And so I really appreciate that you came. Jesus, go ahead and ask your question. Thank you. Oh, we can't hear you. Uh-oh, we can't hear you. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Well, Jesus, I could read your question and you could go thumbs up or thumbs down if it's about what you want to ask. You're interested in writing music that represents your Mexican heritage. What advice might I have about writing music in that form? And also, this is the second part of it, combining the folk music with orchestra, wind ensemble, bring it into the classical arena. That's yeah. Oh, okay, you and I need a cafecito, maybe 3. So I think the first thing you want to, okay, I'm going to share what has worked for me, and you can see if this resonates with you, if this is a tactic or a route that you might consider. So I write my best music when I imagine a fantasy Peru. When I imagine, okay, Peru meets a clarinet. And so like a panpipe meets a clarinet. And if they could have a baby, what kind of music would it make? And it helps me, this kind of fantastical landscape. It helps me find that overlap between the clarinet and the panpipe. And then I write from there so that the DNA is shared. But if you try to do a slavish parallel translation, I don't think, for me, it won't sound as good as the traditional marineras or huaynos or cachos that I would hear in Peru. There is something magical about culture in that it must be transformed for crossing a continent, going into another era. Culture is not just an inheritance, it's an act. And I don't think you can just stay revering the past and revering something that exists. You have to move it forward too. Now you do it with intention and you do it with respect and you do it with audaciousness, all of it. And when I see people just make a literal translation, like I can see what the Peruvian tune is, for instance, and they just put it in a string quartet, it sounds like a pops orchestra trying to play Black music or Brazilian music.
Yeah,
it's just really heavy. It doesn't move right. It's over orchestrated, and a lot of folkloric music is actually not that bass heavy. So you're going to have to sort of cheat the process a little bit to get at a much more interesting Plasencia Mexico. That's what you want. You want that vision. Remember, we're imaginative, right? Yeah. So we're going to do that Mexico with intention. So that would be my first thing. While you're doing it, you may feel like, oh my God, I'm a bad Mexican. I'm a bad Mexican. I'm a bad Peruvian American. I'm a bad Peruvian American. This is not what they would do. But actually, art is artifice in the most altruistic, most beautiful sense. And you're crafting a place for people to step into, a new country for the players to go into. So I would say, if you can think of your research now when you're listening to Mexican music, oh, what can I do with that? How can I honor it? How can I dress it up something different? What would it sound like in a non-Mexican instrument? You really can start playing with it and eliminate the bad ideas and keep the good. So this effort, you may produce 75% that's like, tourist vision. 25% is like, I'm going to explore this some more. It takes time. A lot of people don't have patience. That's when the stuff sounds like, a naturals commercial. And what you really want is something that illuminates for yourself first. If you don't illuminate something for yourself, your players aren't going to be impressed and your audience is going to be left cold. So it has to be something that is a discovery for you too. A little bit like a sci-fi writer, where they set up whole new universes and the laws of gravity are different and creatures with 6 lungs, but you believe it. And it's more real than a story in the here and the now. That's what we need to do if you want to draw on a culture. So that, in my view, that has worked for me.
That's so brilliant. Oh, wow. And I have to say that resonates with us when I bring pieces to the quintet, the ones they like are written like that often. And I have to say, it is challenging for me as someone who's choosing the pieces when it's overtly leaning on folk aspects, whether tonality or rhythmically. And I love the way you said it, when you're kind of building your own world, and the pieces that we play feel like that. And I have to say, Latino audiences, they hear that and they feel that. You don't even have to try. You don't have to try to make it like something that's familiar to them. I see it all the time when there's 1 or 2 or 3 Latino audience members in a formal concert, which often happens. They are thrilled by these art pieces. We don't have to do transcriptions. We don't have to do arrangements. We don't have to do folk songs. They hear it and it sense it in their heart. We only have a few more minutes. I want to give Ray just a second. It's like 30 seconds. Ray, ask your questions. You give a quick answer, Gabby, and then we'll close it out. Ray Furuta, who's a wonderful flute player from the South Bay and an amazing Latino classical music leader as well. Thanks, Ray.
Hi, Gabby. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ray.
It's so good
Rayo.
to see you and see all familiar faces. The question I posed, and I know you and I have actually talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to sort of share it with the whole group. But as a mixed Latino and Asian, Japanese, Mexican, American myself, advocacy can get muddled and confusing sometimes, especially when there is a specific focus on a specific community at a specific time, right? So how would you advise Latino musicians to effectively be allies and advocates for those who are non-Latino, while also strongly advocating for their own people as well?
This is an amazing question. And I've had this conversation with a number of my African-American peers about this. And so often we feel like you have to get in line before a right is extended to you. It's the history of this country where rights are extended painfully to constituencies after constituencies. And about how I was talking with some of my peers about this research I was doing after I saw a New York Times article about a woman in Southern California who was researching Mexican lynchings, looking at the same kind of violence that this country got very good at wielding against the African-American population, against Latinos. And I did not realize that this was a thing, but it is. And another article I read was about the addiction that we had to slavery and the economic benefit of it that we are still reaping these days. We haven't broken that addiction if you look at our relationship to undocumented workers here. And the kind of violence that can happen to them, and they can't post a video of that to get some sort of restitution of justice. So one of the things, and these are very, very careful conversations, because I think sometimes we all do feel like that there's a limited amount of attention or resources. And my first steps with this has been to just look at the commonalities, how the kind of violence that one group of people is getting is a violence that another one's doing, is also receiving. The kind of attention one group is getting is also the same. I don't have a clear answer. I'm sort of figuring my way out with this too, as I've had more and more of a platform. And there have been uncomfortable moments, I have to say. There have been uncomfortable moments where I felt like I had to really diplomatically weigh, almost like the musical chairs, in how I was addressing wrongs and racismo against all of us. My strategy has been to point out commonalities, that what hurts one hurts the other, what benefits one doesn't take something away from the other.
Not at all.
This thing of scarcity, it's very harmful for us.
Well, I really appreciate that, Gabby, and I love that we can talk deeply about these issues in classical music. We are at the end of our time here today, and first I want to thank just our funders, which is the California Humanities, which is also a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and for the funding this webinar series. Thank you, Gabby, for being here with us and for speaking so beautifully and vulnerably about these tough issues that we're all facing. I really also want to thank everyone who came and for spending time with us. I love seeing so many familiar faces and some new ones, and I just love the community at Quinteto Latino. It thrills and fuels me for the work that we're all doing together. All of us, everybody here is doing it together. All of us have a piece in this work about social change, about highlighting brown voices in classical music, and I appreciate all of your partnerships, both new friends and ones that have visited before. I hope you guys can stay connected to each other. We're going to have another, I don't have the date on my script. Do you know that date, Adriana? Oh, I want to also just highlight both. I said hi to Leslie and Diane, who are musicians here. And thank you, Leslie and Diane. And also the team at Quinteto Latino, which includes our wonderful general manager, Andrea Temkin, who's here, and our fascinating marketing and communications, Vince, who was in charge of this whole project. Vince, thank you. And Adriana Ramirez Mirabal, who's our amazing coordinator. Dual Adriana, thank you. And you know, it's very important that we have a multicultural, diverse staff to meet the modern multicultural diverse needs of our communities. And I feel like Quinteto Latino really seeks to do that. And that's why I really want to highlight their voices as well and the awesome work that they're doing. The next one is happening on June 5th. Again, we're going to have Jesus Placencia, who's here, who also has a question. Jesus, we will get your audio fixed before then, and and see you on that day. Thank you, Quinteto Latino board members who are here, and our seminary participants who have been working with our musicians here that were part of our seminario summer convening last summer, who came to this as well. So just appreciation to everybody, and my dad who's here, who's not on video, as all you see him there. So thank you everybody for coming. All right, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Aurora, thanks for coming. Martin, Chandler, Dad, Alan, Ray, thanks for asking your question. Ben, thank you for coming. Yay, and checking it out. Okay, and bye Jane, good to see you. And Marvin, thanks for coming and for being a supporter always. Okay, it's good to say hi to your wife, please. Oh, she's there. Hey. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.